it's not just important for the rest of life, like for your career or whatever, but it's just very empowering to know, like, if something goes wrong, I can take care of it myself. When you learn, like, for example, that fiber, like, okay, fiber is good for us, whatever. When you go in depth into the large intestine and everything fiber does, all of a sudden kids are like, oh yeah, I need fiber. I don't want to not have fiber. That would be awful, right? So as you understand what each thing does for us, what does vitamin C do? Oh, so many things. With vitamin C, I always think about the traditional pirate, the eye patch and the leg missing and the skin sores looking all gross and scary. Oh, that's scurvy. That's a lack of vitamin C right there. And then kids are like, I don't want to be like that. I want vitamin C. And you know what? People do what they need to do when they understand what's going on with their bodies, instead of just being told, like, you should do this, because shoulds never got anyone anywhere.
Thank you for listening to the Healthy Parenting Handbook podcast from Kids Cook Real Food. I'm Katie Kimball, and today my guest is Dr. Robin Dickinson. Doc Robin is one of our Life Skills Now summer camp leaders for season 3 in 2024. We are so excited to work with her, and I cannot wait to introduce you to her because she's got a great science story. She's got a great entrepreneurship story. She's got a great mom story. All of that blended together is really going to help you today, especially as we strive to raise critically thinking children, kids who can think like scientists. This is a little bit about Dr. Robin Dickinson. She's an MD and a family physician. She's a medical school faculty member and a homeschooling mom. Together with her husband, she's got 2 kids, 4 cats, and a very cute dog. Even with her med school education, Dr. Robin felt overwhelmed and frustrated when trying to teach science to her own children. So she created a science curriculum, the one that she couldn't find, the one that she really wanted for her own kids. So now we all get to benefit from her frustration because she's created a solution that she can share with all of us. This interview is so much fun. Dr. Robin and I both kind of tackle the world of education from different directions in a way, right? She's coming from science. I'm coming from English. I'm a teacher by trade. She's a teacher at heart. And she does such great things for kids. I know you're going to love this conversation, particularly when we talk about creating a commercial jingle for your own parenting. Here's Dr. Robin Dickinson. Doc Robin is in the house. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm so delighted to be here with you today.
Your story is so great. I have to tell you, I've even used it as a little example when I was talking about entrepreneurship and how a lot of people pivoted during COVID. And so I want you to start there. What's your story? What made you fall in love with medicine, and why did you leave your practice behind?
Yeah, this was certainly not what I was expecting to do when I grew up. I actually wanted to be a doctor since I was 6. Actually, I said I wanted to be a nurse. I didn't want to deal with pee or poop or blood. But my mom said, hey, you be a doctor and your nurse will deal with that for you, which back then I think it was like 15% of doctors were female. So kudos to her for saying that. But she was completely wrong. I dealt with a lot of pee and poop and blood. So that's in the nature of the thing. But it got me thinking about, like, wait, I can be a doctor. So that's really when I started down that path and just loved so many things. I love science, obviously. I love people and talking with people, and I loved mysteries and figuring things out, which doctors do a lot of mystery solving. So that was all fun. And then I gave it up in a heartbeat. Like March 2020, I have 2 kids with autism who are doing great, especially since I'm home with them. It makes a huge difference for them. But I wasn't before. But in March 2020, I was like, I can't take care of all these patients and also take care of my kids. So at the time, I owned my own practice. It was a micro practice, no staff. And I cared for mostly people who had no insurance or other access to medical care. So I felt like I couldn't walk away from it. But then a friend connected me with another person who had left medicine for a while because of an car accident and wanted to get back in. And so March 31st, 2020, we traded off. She bought the practice. I walked away and didn't know what I was going to be when I grew up, because that was the end goal, and that was gone. So what was I going to do now? But my sister's a K-8 certified teacher, and she was like, well, you should teach online. And I was like, I'm not a teacher. I don't know how to do this. She's like, oh yeah, you know how to teach. Do it. So it was with her encouragement, I started teaching online pre-med classes to kids and loved it. Like, I thought I loved being a doctor, but actually I really, really love teaching. It was so much fun. The first Zoom class with 8 kids in it, I was terrified. Like, I don't know what I thought they were going to do to me, but I was so scared. But now I've taught over 2,000 classes live to kids all over the world. Absolutely love it. But there's not enough of me to go around. So I end up starting my curriculum that people can sign up for. Some kids use it extracurricular, some use it for homeschool. But it's really expanded my reach beyond what I personally have time to do. So it's been fun.
There's so much amazingness to unpack there. The serendipity of someone being able to step in within weeks and care for your patients. And also, I mean, I just love, Robin, that you had such a heart for your patients and that you felt like you were choosing between your children and your patient children in a way. That speaks a lot about you. And it's part of what makes you such a good teacher. I feel like anyone listening to this is going to hear the teacher, the educator in your voice already, because I do. Like, just anytime we chat, I think, oh, she's got to be good, you know?
Well, it's funny because my Jen, who bought the practice, she told me, like, when she told people what I was doing now, every single one was, oh, well, that makes sense, because that's what she did. Because I had all my appointments were an hour long because I didn't like just like, here, this is what you have, do something. Like, I sat down and taught my patients the same way I teach my students. So if they had diabetes, they got the full diabetes lecture on like everything about it. So they really understood it, how all the medications work, why they needed to change their lifestyle, how that actually affected each organ in their body. And you know what? People do what they need to do when they understand what's going on with their bodies instead of just being told, like, you should do this, because shoulds never got anyone anywhere. So,
Ooh, you've got some quotable quotes there at the end there, Doc Robin. And I do have to come back to, though, you call them pre-med classes
mhm.
for kids. Pre-med classes for kids. I kind of that was a little surprising. Tell me why you don't just call them science classes or biology or body or anything
Mhm.
else. Pre-med?
Well, I mean, if you Google search it, it's going to say something like human biology or science for kids, because people don't search pre med for kids, which was a tricky thing. Like, people search coding for kids or robotics for kids, but nobody searches pre med for kids, which is odd to me. Like, they search for health, but very shallow stuff, because I mean, robotics are fun. My son loves coding, but like, we all have a body and we need to be able to take care of it. And the reality is, most of us at some point are going to have a medical problem or a disability, and people don't know anything about them. And it's terrifying if you don't understand anything about it. Like, it's great to know how your computer works, but it's not terrifying if you don't know. It is terrifying if you don't know about your own body. And we can prevent a lot of those problems when people actually understand it.
I totally agree. And I love that you were really redefining healthcare in a way when you were having those long appointments alone is redefining healthcare, but combining education with healthcare and your literal care, your emotional care for your patients was such a redefinition. And now you're redefining the way kids can learn about their bodies, to think about themselves as pre-med students, to think about themselves as future doctors, and the
Mhm.
solving of the mysteries too. Like, that just spoke to my heart as a former Nancy Drew reader,
Yes,
chronic
me
as
too.
a child. I loved mysteries too. And I see that even just in what I do, just doing a little bit of, you start down a rabbit hole of a tiny bit of research about a health issue and you're solving mysteries. You have kids and they say, Mommy, something hurts, right? It's a, it's a mystery to be solved. So it is amazing that you're equipping children with the toolbox that they need now and will need in the future to begin to solve their own health mysteries. And
Mhm.
I don't think anyone's doing that. I would love to hear your take on education in general today. Like, when you look at kids, how they're being educated, what thoughts do you have? Where are we succeeding and where do we need to improve?
I mean, certainly compared to when I was a kid, I think we're headed in the right direction. I know some people are talking about, like, we should go back to how it was, but I like how personalized it is now. Different kids have different needs, different kids have different interests, and being able to angle it in different ways. And especially really since COVID, there's so much online where parents have these options where they can say, like, this isn't working for my kid, I'm going to do something else. And of course, homeschoolers have been doing that for a long time. But I think now it's become so acceptable and normal, like, oh, the way they're learning math isn't working, I'm going to find a different way. Right. And so I love that aspect of it. One way I think we're kind of going astray a bit is there's this huge focus on engineering and technology, which is great. I mean, obviously, my job is pretty technologically connected. But at the same time, we're still human beings and we have bodies and brains and things that need taking care of. And it's been surprising to me, just simple things like my daughter's a BSA scout. Um, Used to be Boy Scouts, but now it's girls too. And they don't have the same kind of badges and stuff for human body as they do for all this techie stuff. And Girl Scouts are actually a lot worse. At least with the Boy Scouts, they do have like a medical professional type badge. The Girl Scouts, tons and tons of robotics and technology. And then there's like this little first aid badge on the side, which I know we expect Scouts to know first aid. But whether it's, wherever it is we're educating kids, it's good to have that focus on technology. I want kids to know about our world and how to interact with it. But also, I think we're losing sight of the biology, the living sciences that we are actually a part of ourselves in our bodies.
Well, and let's throw in things like the trades and working with one's hands and, like these pendulums, we tend to, I think throughout history, the pendulums tend to swing too far before we yank them back. And
Yeah.
so, while perhaps we needed, and especially for females, a greater focus on science, technology, math, etc., we've pushed it so far that we're starting to lose the other positive that you said, which is personalization.
Yeah.
Maybe someone doesn't have an engineering brain and we have to be okay with that, right? So,
Yeah.
yes.
And I totally agree with the trade. And it depends. In some ways, medicine is actually a trade too. I mean, we learn through apprenticeship. It's lots of hands-on. Nursing also, a lot less education, a lot more hands-on. Or my husband actually works in a trade. My son is hopefully going to have a career in ballet, which is very physical. And it's interesting because people keep asking me, like, don't you want him to have a real job? And I'm like, well, what's a real job? And they're like, well, an education. And I'm like, he's getting really educated. Like he's going towards his career 20, 30 hours a week. That's an education. And my husband didn't find his real passion for work until he walked away from all the pressure to get an education and do something in that direction and got to work with his hands. I think different people learn and enjoy different things. And, frankly, I like physically doing things too. Like being a doctor and hands-on and touching people is fun. Teaching is a little bit different, but still all the models and drawings, and it's very hands-on. That's what I like. And, I have a brother who's an engineer, and that's awesome for him, but not for me. So that's cool.
Yeah, there's so much. Like you just described being a doctor as hands-on, but I think most people would think of being a doctor as very academic. So clearly it's a mixture of the two, right? You've got to have a variety of skills. And we're getting a little off topic here, but kids need so many different things, just like your patients need so many different things. So when
I can tell the difference, like in my because I also am an adjunct faculty at a medical school where I teach clinical skills, how to examine patients, how to talk to patients. I can tell if kids have done embroidery or worked with tools or just done other things with their hands, because you hand them an instrument, and if they've never worked with their hands before, they can't even figure out how to hold the thing, much less use it. And if kids have been using their hands to play instruments, to cook in the kitchen, to work in the garden, then they're really comfortable using their hands, because there's a lot of education that goes into being a doctor. And obviously I'm still always learning, but it's also very physical. You have to be able to do a lot of things with your body that nobody prepares you for on the way to medical school. And you get there and you're like, oh, nobody told me I'd have to actually use my body to do things.
I think what you're saying is that Life Skills Now summer camp can prepare future doctors. I think that's what I'm hearing.
Oh, for sure. Well, and it's funny because I looked through the list of things and I'm like, oh, these are mostly things I've already taught my kids, because to me, it's really important that my kids know how to do all the things around the house and the yard and cook and clean and work on cars and repair plumbing. And because it's not just important for the rest of life, like for your career or whatever, but it's just very empowering to know, like, if something goes wrong, I can take care of it myself. I mean, I mostly finished my kid's bedroom myself. I hung the door. And knowing that I could do that felt so good that, like, I'm not dependent on someone else. I can step in and do it. And even things I haven't done, like I haven't done plumbing yet, but I'm really comfortable that if I need to learn it, I mean, I've learned all the other things. I can do this too.
That's definitely one of my biggest goals for Life Skills Now summer camp, is just that we want kids to feel confident, yes, with the skills they're learning, but exactly what you said, like stepping into something new and thinking, I can probably do this. And if I can't, I can probably figure it out. And if I can't figure it out, I can ask other people and I know how to
Mhm.
ask good questions, like just keep going. And science and medicine is all about asking questions. So my question for you is, why should we teach kids and tweens and teens, young people, in-depth medical science to learn to care for their bodies instead of just like letting it be done in school, covering the facts,
Mhm.
taking the tests and all that stuff?
Well, I mean, for one thing, we know it's not working, right? I mean, I don't know about you, but being told that I should or shouldn't do something has not yet changed any of my habits. So it's something that we need a different approach. And I think obviously, I've been very passionate about this forever, but the first taste I got that this would really work, not just in my practice, but with education, was actually the person who was editing my videos when I first started. And she was home because of COVID. I couldn't go anywhere. And so she was just editing videos to make some money. And she sent me a photo of her shopping cart, and it had like normal stuff I would expect in a shopping cart. And she was like, "Look what you made me do. I'm buying all this healthy food." And I was like, I I haven't actually recorded a single lesson about nutrition at that point. I hadn't said anything about healthy food. And I was like, "Well, what tell me, why are you?" And she's like, "Well, I feel like all my organs are like pets inside me I have to take care of, and they need things and I need to do that for them." And to me, that was so like, okay, this is why I'm doing this. Like, if I can take someone who's an adult, who's been living one way her whole life, and she's changing her habits because of watching videos that have nothing to do with food, except they have everything to do with food because that's what our body thrives on, right? That's what we need. That's our fuel. That's our nutrition. Those are the building blocks of us. And, to me, that tells me this is working. This is why we're doing this.
And you hadn't taught nutrition yet, which is so funny. It means that she had had the messages of like vegetables, whole foods are better, processed foods are not as good, probably a
Mhm.
million times,
Right.
but she didn't care before. Gosh, don't you wish you had a before picture of what her cart used to look
I
like?
sure do. I mean, I have some ideas based on like her descriptions of like mac and cheese and canned soup, but when you learn, like, for example, that fiber, like, okay, fiber is good for us, whatever. When you go in depth into the large intestine and everything fiber does, all of a sudden kids are like, "Oh yeah, I need fiber. I don't want to not have fiber. That would be awful." Right? So as you
Mhm.
understand what each thing does for us, what does vitamin C do? Oh, so many things. I with vitamin C, I always think about the traditional pirate with, the eye patch and the leg missing and the skin sores and looking all gross and scary. Oh, that's scurvy. That's a lack of vitamin C right there. And then kids are like, "Oh, I don't want to be like that. I want vitamin C." So, it's just woven in as we learn about all the different parts of the body. Our, I think another problem is that we learn about them separately. Like in coloring books, usually there's like this heart floating in space where there's like this organ, kind of there, but they're all connected, right? Like the reason why we exist and survive is because of all of it. It all works together.
Did you end up ever recording videos about your pet organs? Yeah.
I think once in a while it's now come up like they're pets inside of you because I just loved that.
So cute.
So I can't like it just when I talk about it, sometimes I'll be like, they're like pets inside me because I just loved it.
It's so cute. When you talk about that, of the vitamin C and the pirate, like, first of all, what a perfect perspective for a kid. Like, it's just so easy now to remember what vitamin C does. And I wonder, do you ever get any pushback or see the conversations on social media with people saying we shouldn't say, that certain foods are good or certain foods are
Mhm.
bad or this is healthy for you? Like, I can almost picture people on social media hearing you say, well, you need vitamin C, and saying, oh, don't teach kids that. Then they're going to be like orthorexic and reading all the
Mhm.
signs for vitamin C. Like, what's your take on all that?
Well, I'm actually really sensitive to that because I have a family member who has anorexia and lived with me in the thick of it, like the worst parts of everything. So that's something I'm actually very sensitive to. And I think teaching nutrition and actual details instead of labeling food as good or bad is actually much healthier. I mean, we eat ice cream at my house and it's fine because what I focus on is we need to make sure we're getting the nutrients we need. Every time we eat something that doesn't have the nutrients we need, then we have to decide, that's a trade off. It's like a budget, right? When I buy something I don't need, do I still have the money for what I do need? Everything is a trade off. And so it's not good food or bad food. It's, am I getting the nutrition that I need? And do I need to get that first? Do I want to do this first? I mean, to be totally honest with you, once in a while when I'm not coping, we have ice cream for supper. And that's not because I think it's a healthy food. but partly because I'm not coping that day. But partly because I want my kids to have this flexible mindset of food is not, we don't just see it as like, this is bad, this is good. We have to think about the details of like, what is it our body really needs? How are we fueling our body? And what that means is they don't feel a lot of guilt or shoulds about food. They just, this is just how we eat and this is what my body needs, which I really saw. My son's, I mentioned, doing ballet. So he's in a pre-professional program. He's 15, so he's like getting close to where he wants to be when he grows up. And they had a nutritionist or dietitian come in, work with the kids some, because so many of them develop eating disorders. And they had someone else, a psychiatrist, psychologist, I think it was a psychologist, who came and talked with them about mental health and sleep. And my son was just like, well, mom, I'm doing great. I'm getting everything I need. I'm getting enough sleep. I'm drinking lots of water. I don't really like soda. I'm eating all this food that I actually need for my body. And like, I feel good. How do they even function like that? And like, it doesn't, to him, it's not like, oh, you have to eat good food. Instead, it's like, this is what I need to be who I want to be, to achieve the way I want to achieve, to feel the way I want to feel.
Just quickly interrupting, which is not a very good life skill, is it? We should teach our kids not to interrupt. I have to tell you about Life Skills Now Season 3, happening June 24th through 28th, 2024. Life Skills Now has been an incredible virtual summer camp, completely free. The moment you register, you get access to 13 workshops that you can use all the way until June. And then the 24th to the 28th, we host 100 plus virtual workshops teaching kids ages 5 to 18 hands-on and minds-on life skills. Categories include entrepreneurship, communication, tech savviness, hands-on like woodworking, cooking, and gardening. It's out of this world, and I just have to give you a couple previews of what your kids will get to learn. They'll get to learn how to be polite, how to start conversations, a couple different videos on making snacks and breakfast, and even how to break down a whole chicken from a guy who's a huge wilderness expert and reality TV show participant. We're taking you into the workshop to make a pencil holder, and also for our teens to learn to use a powered drill. In finances, we're talking about compound interest and teaching kids how we pay for things. Cash, cards, click, taps. What does it all mean when we can't always see money changing hands? And then we have a lot of mental stuff too, like overcoming your power block, setting goals for teens, creating a clutter-free study zone and why that's going to make a difference in your kids' focus as they're working. We also have stuff for you, the parents, in our preschool track and our parenting professional development track, as well as our neurodivergent track for families. And you know what? It's at the bottom of my list, but it should never be last. We have a wellness track too, that covers both physical and mental wellness. And I just used Dr. Jihan's, one of her tools to stop being nervous with my little one this morning because he has his standardized testing. Life Skills Now Season 3 is going to be amazing. I know I've talked too long, but I'm just so pumped about the depth and breadth of all of these workshops. Go immediately to kidscookrealfood.com/lifeskills. Sign up your whole family. It's free. You can get started on 13 workshops right away. And I'm so excited to share that with you.
To him, it's not like, oh, you have to eat good food. Instead, it's like, this is what I need to be who I want to be, to achieve the way I want to achieve, to feel the way I want to feel.
Well, that is beautiful. Do you find it a challenge at all in a world where a lot of other people are trying to give your kids foods that it's a really fair thing to say that can take the place of the foods we need more primarily?
I think so much of it, we have control over what happens at home. We don't have control over what happens outside our home. So at home, I just don't bring it home. It makes it easy. So at home we eat, I cook basically everything that we eat. And we have, and I talk with the kids about like, this is why I'm fixing this, or this is what this is giving you, or, oh, you're not feeling good. Maybe it's because you need this. And as they start to associate all that with like, this is why we need this. This is why we're eating this. It's not shaming other ways of eating. And certainly, when there are other places, I know that the cast party for Nutcracker, my son ate a lot of pizza. But, a one-time pizza binge is not going to kill him. And he didn't come home feeling guilt about it, right? That was just like, it was a thing he did for fun. I didn't tell him he shouldn't eat pizza. But then he also was like, Mom, I don't feel very good. I think I need like something else at home. And I was like, sure. What do you want? And so we ended up, making him some scrambled eggs and having some, some other food that's going to be a little bit more solid. So, that's something that, because at home the kids are getting this constantly in a non-judgmental, loving, just like this is going to help you and I love you, so I'm doing this for you kind of way, they can make those choices in other places. And what I see is they're not generally choosing the junk food, or generally they don't like a lot of that, or they don't feel good, they notice the difference. So
It kind of takes eating well, I think, to notice the difference than when
mhm.
you fall off the wagon,
Yeah.
and eat a lot of junk. But when it's a constant source in the diet, I don't know that kids necessarily feel it. I'm in a little bit of a struggle right now. Like we just had our kids clean out. There's a drawer where they're supposed to have like a Costco size nut jar that
Uh-huh.
fits all the candy that we buy zero candy, but it comes home, right?
Right. Oh yes, oh
Halloween,
does it ever come
Valentine's
home.
Day, oh yeah, parades in the summer, but they
Mhm.
have to fit it all in there. And
Mhm.
both of my younger boys, 9 and 12, came upstairs yesterday with a whole bag, like a serious amount, probably 2 pounds of candy each
Wow.
that they could not fit inside that nut jar. They're like, I'm stuck. Like, I don't know what to do with what's left. And so that's my struggle, is like, if I just let them actually eat it all
Yeah.
without any limits, it would be too much, even though we don't bring it in. So we do say
Mhm.
like one dessert a day. I don't know if I'm going to screw up my kids, but I just can't let them have it
Well,
like
and here's the
everything all the
thing.
time.
I think all moms worry about screwing up our kids because we want what's best for them. And we love them so much, we don't want to mess anything up. And we can't be perfect all the time, which is actually super important. Because what if our kids thought that to be a good adult, we had to be perfect all the time? Then they're going to feel awful the first time they're an adult and can't adult correctly. So, the more, at first I felt like I have to be perfect, but then I started realizing like, no, actually I need to mess up. And then I need to go back and tell my kids like, hey, you know, I'm regretting that I did that. I'm really sorry about that. Whether it was losing my temper with them or feeding them something that made one of them throw up, or because that's my son in particular will just gorge on junk food if it's available. Even though he eats healthy most of the time, but if there's something he likes and there's unlimited amounts of it, he will eat unlimited amounts. And my mom is not so careful. And once at her house, he ate just tons of candy, threw up on the way home. Um, and so, saying like, I'm really sorry I didn't stop you because I knew that was going to happen and I could have prevented that. Being able to go back and say like, this is something I wish I hadn't done. This kids see over and over and over again that like mom screws up, like quite frequently actually, and it's okay. Like what we do is it's not that we have to be perfect. We just go back and make it better. So every time my kids mess up, it's, what do we need to do to make this better? And that takes away that shame, I think, both for the kids, but also for me as a parent, because I do want to do what's best, like all of us do.
For sure, there's so many opportunities for us to model for our kids. And I'm definitely not afraid of showing my kids that I've messed up. We've changed our habit from you have to finish your dinner before you can have dessert. I've dialed back on that and just said one a day. I just can't quite go to like, oh, you can eat whatever you see. So
Yeah.
sugar and I, we'll see how we end up in 20 or 30 years on my relationship with sugar and my kids. But when
Well,
it
that's the
when it
thing is we're doing this like long-term project where we don't get to see the outcomes for like such a long time. Did it work? Didn't we? I mean, we don't know until we get there. When the kids were younger, I used to say, if I can't experiment on my own kids, who can I experiment on? But that shocked some people, so I dialed back on that.
It's all an experiment, and we all are. You just think like a scientist and speak like a scientist. And I think all kids should learn to think and speak like scientists. So, Dr. Robin, since this is definitely one of the philosophies that you love to preach too, what kinds of questions would you recommend parents ask just on a day-to-day basis to like keep their kids' brains thinking scientifically with curiosity about the world?
Mm-hmm. I mean, any of the questions kids tend to ask you, I think are great ones to ask, why, how, what do you think will happen next? And, I try and make sure my kids don't ever feel put on the spot. That's something that happens during school where it's like, what's the answer to this question, which can be very stressful. And so oftentimes I'll be like, I wonder why this is happening. And so it just opens it to the kids. Or if they ask a question I don't know, I tell them like, I don't know, let's look it up. And, we'll talk about what resources we're using to look things up, because especially nowadays, you can't trust so much of what's out there. And there's some good research that kids will fall for all sorts of non scientific resources and just get junk and things like junk in their minds, like junk in their bodies, right? And so teaching them how to be thoughtful about that. And then also teaching them like, oh, that didn't work. I wonder why. Like, oh, my cake fell. Cooking's a great time to do that. And I don't bake a lot of cakes, but I do all the family birthday cakes. And I'm the oldest of 6 kids. And I'll do whatever people request, which oftentimes is things we don't eat so much at home. But that's okay. Like it's a once a year thing. And if a cake falls, because I often do a practice one, which the kids love. Instead of being like, oh no, my cake fell. I'm like, oh, that was interesting. I wonder why it fell. Let's look at this. Let's look at the science of what's making this cake work and what could have made it fall and how could we do it differently. When my son, he had a lot of digestive issues. So GI was constantly trying different diets. And for a while he was grain free. And I kept trying to find a pizza crust that worked. And some of them were just terrible because I was trying out different recipes, different combinations. And eventually I found a combination of different recipes that everyone loved. It was a great crust. But the way we did it is we'd try a pizza crust and I'd be like, okay, I don't like this. What do you guys think? Because I'd be watching their faces. They didn't like it.
Right.
I'm like, yeah. I was like, okay, well, what do we not like about it? I wonder what ingredient caused that. I wonder what we could do to change that. Maybe if we added this, would that work? Or this. So over time, we developed our own recipe that we really liked. And they developed the ability to say like, okay, if something doesn't turn out, it's not a failure. We just learned one way that doesn't work. Right. And when my son was little, he'd often say like, oh, that didn't work, but that's okay. I'm being a good scientist. That was because I said that to him so often that, little kids, they repeat it back.
They do. And then it gets incorporated, I think, into their own being, their own philosophy and way of thinking. And so we as parents kind of need to figure out our own taglines, right? Our own little commercial jingles for life, so to speak.
It is like jingles that they hear over and over.
Yeah. And, asking questions, you are very, very good at that when you demonstrate. I feel like sometimes in our busy lives, I mean, I know I'm supposed to ask questions and I'll still just give answers from, quite often. And so this is a good reminder for everyone listening, Katie included. Like, okay, let's ask more questions than we just give answers because the kids need to figure out answers, for themselves. And you've given some amazing examples in the kitchen, which of course I love because that's what we do. We teach kids to cook and there's so many benefits to being in the kitchen. But here at Kids Cook Real Food, we have a lot of conversations too about helping kids to take ownership of their health. And it's very related to cooking and asking those questions. Do you have any more strategies for parents to help their kids do that, to care about how they feel or what they eat and do it well?
Kids can't help but see the world from their own perspective. I mean, we talk about kids being self-centered when they're little, or we try to teach them not to be self-centered. But the reality is our own bodies are the only way we experience the world. And so we can't imagine how someone else experiences the world. We can learn empathy. We can, sympathize with other people. We can think about how our behavior affects other people. But ultimately, we're it. Like what we experience is all we can go by because that's the information coming into our brain. And so, I think the more we can relate it back to a kid's own experiences in their own body, the more it's going to be real and something that they're actually going to go with instead of like, oh, this is that thing out there away from me that doesn't affect me. Right. As opposed to, oh, this is actually happening inside me and I can feel it. I can sense it. I can know it.
That makes so much sense. And I know a lot of people in my community are already taking your classes. And I'd love you to talk a little bit about why it's so different learning health, medicine, nutrition. I mean, it's all sort of biology, right? Pre-med, we can put a lot of labels on it. Why is it different learning that from a doctor than a teacher?
I think learning from a doctor is different. And I mean, my sister's a teacher. I love teachers. And the difficulty is that teachers have a very broad education and can't dig down in one area. I mean, it'd be impossible for a teacher to be able to focus as much on science as I have because you have to learn all these other things that I didn't have to learn. And so, in college, I could focus not entirely on science. I double majored in biology and history. So I had a lot of fun in college. I took Old English. I did random stuff. But, I always had probably like 2 science classes going. I ended up with a minor in chemistry, 1 class credit minor in physics, like so much science. And then in medical school, it's this whole different level of how all the science is connected and work together. It's, until I got to medical school, I didn't really understand, like it's all one thing. Like all of science, we can't, in high school, you silo it off. you have to learn biology and chemistry and physics, and each thing is separate. And in medical school, it's not. Like, it's all part of how the human body works. And seeing the world that way in that depth of science means that in the same way a teacher is able to deal with a lot of different topics as they come up, I'm able to deal with a lot of different science as it comes up, right? So I can see how it all connects and flows. And when a kid asks a question, I can pop up and down to any level. Like, we can go down to chemistry, we can go out to physics, we can go into biology, and how it all actually works. Instead of like the little like official answer, it's like, this is how it really works, like really, really works. Which I think for kids, they always want to know that, right? They want to know like really how this, like, why does that? Well, then why that? Well, then why that? Well, then how does that? Well, then how does that? And I can actually do that in this one area. I mean, you asked me about computers. I have no idea. But in this one area of, human biology, chemistry, kind of like the living parts of science, so to speak, whatever kids want to know, I can go there, which is fun.
It is so cool. And it's really the difference between learning from an expert and learning from someone who's kind of learning as they go. There's research that says what you understand or remember such and such percentage of what you watch and of what you hear and of what you read, blah, 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 and 90% of what you teach.
Right.
Which kind of means that a lot of times when people are teaching, they're learning as they go, right? Which is
even me, I'm so much better at anatomy now than I was in medical school, because kids are going to ask me like every little detail. So I have to actually know and understand that, because I know they're going to ask. And so it's a whole different level of understanding than just enough to pass the test.
Those connections are golden, because it is going to help kids learn, like you said, deeper and just create those webs of knowledge closer to, a scientist or an adult's web of knowledge, which is so, so, so cool. Do you see, like, do you have any stories of younger kids learning this stuff where people would not expect, this material to go down even to high school, but certainly not below high school? Like, how do you do that with 6-year-olds or 12-year-olds?
Yeah. So just one example, but it always sticks in my mind because I happen to be teaching the same things to medical students and to the kids the same week, which normally doesn't happen. But I was working with medical students about how to interpret lab results. And I was working with my kids, my students who are like, in 3rd through 8th grade, on the effects of different nutritional deficiencies. So it doesn't sound like it's the same thing, but it comes out the same. Because when I asked the medical students, like, okay, so let's look at these lab results. What do you think is going on? Why are there red blood cells this way? No idea. And I was like, okay, well, let's start thinking through this. But they're not used to thinking. They're used to memorizing, right? And memorizing is completely different than thinking. And it's an important skill to have, but it's not how all of learning should go, or even most of learning, right? But the kids, I was able to say, okay, if someone doesn't get enough iron, what do you think will happen? And without much prompting at all from me, and in some of my classes, no prompting at all, the kids were able to say, like, okay, well, iron is used in your red blood cells to carry oxygen. So if you don't have enough iron, you probably wouldn't be able to make enough red blood cells, or maybe they'd be too small or not be able to work very well. And I'm like, excellent, good, that's anemia, wonderful. What kind of symptoms do you think they'd have? And they could think through, like, okay, what do you need oxygen for? Well, you need it to exercise, you need it to think, you need it for your brain. So they immediately like, well, you could get really tired, you could have trouble thinking, you could pass out, you could get short of breath. And like, they came up with all the symptoms on their own. I didn't have to tell them, because they thought, right? They thought about like what's going to happen logically, as opposed to memorizing, like, what are the symptoms of anemia, which is a completely different experience, right? So these kids are not going to forget why they need iron or what's going to happen if they don't get iron, because they figured it out themselves. And it's so magical to watch that happen in their brains too.
That's absolutely incredible. I'm so smitten with your story. For anyone who's just listening, I'm like smiling and emoting. I'm just like enraptured over here, because it's like the underdog story. The kids are smarter than the much. And, we teach critical thinking in season 3 of Life Skills Now, not you, but someone else. Yeah. But you are teaching 2 workshops. I'd love you to give people a quick preview of Life Skills Now season 3, 2024, what you are teaching, and then also tell us how to connect with you if they want their kids to have the experience from learning from Doc Robin.
Excellent. Yes, thank you. So I'm teaching 2, which you actually put out to your people to see what moms and other parents were interested in. No surprises. The two I thought they would be interested in were the two. One is about sleep. I know we all want more sleep. We worry about our kids' sleep. I forgot there was some study recently just how tired parents are all the time, which makes sense, right? We're trying to do all the things, and the easiest thing to kind of cut back on is sleep, but it's probably one of the worst in a lot of ways. So when I teach about sleep, it's not this is what you should do. Instead, it's all the cool stuff about sleep, like what's happening during sleep, what's your brain doing, and just how amazing this science is. And it's brand new cutting edge science, which I think makes it really interesting too, because this isn't just like, oh, everybody always says the thing. This is like, we're doing active research right now. The other one's about sugar, which I know we were already talking about that earlier. And, sugar is a favorite with kids and maybe a favorite concern with parents. But how does sugar actually work in our bodies? Why does it make us feel so yucky? That roller coaster of sugar and insulin. We dig all the way down into the cells. We have animations showing what's happening. And I think it's a lot of why my kids themselves don't eat a lot of sugar, because they know this a little bit too well, a little bit of eye roll sometimes because, gee, mom, we know that already. But, it's how I taught my patients and really saw them change how they ate and change how they felt. So I know it works. And, that's something that was really fun to provide for the kids too.
I feel like the kids are going to be teaching adults after watching your workshops, especially cutting edge sleep stuff. They'll be able to educate up the ladder, which is so amazing. And you're right. It doesn't really work to look at a piece of candy and think, I should not eat that just because I know it's bad, or someone told me it's bad or it's not healthy.
I hear all the time from parents that their kids have taught them. They'll be like, I was having a soda, and you know what my kid told me? They said this, and thank you so much for educating them. I've gotten multiple emails about kids brushing their teeth. Apparently, dental care is an issue in many homes, and I get to show them like what rotten teeth look like and why we need to brush our teeth, and it's inspiring apparently, because I've heard about that a lot. So yeah, no, when kids hear about these things, some things we know as parents maybe like as a should, but it's fun when the kids sit down and teach their parents. It's also fun when the parents contact me and like, can you explain this a little bit more? My kid was telling me this. Are there more resources? Because it's stuff we didn't get to learn, right? I never learned this in school until I got medical school. So it's something that I think parents often enjoy as much as their kids.
It's so cool. Pre-med for kids, and we get some little previews in Life Skills Now Camp, and then you have a whole online school. Tell us about that just very briefly, live recorded. What are the classes like?
All of it. So, awesome. What I can do live is more limited. So that's why there's a lot of recorded. It's what a lot of parents prefer, right? It's really inconvenient to have to come at a certain time. One of the reasons parents like this kind of thing, if you're homeschool, you're doing it because you need some flexibility usually, or you want to have control over your schedule or when and how your kid learn things. So the recorded lessons are great for that. And a lot of families do it extracurricularly, which definitely needs to be on a time that works for them. And I have kids from all over the world, which also means lots of different time zones. The live classes I do are, at this point, we have a coloring book club that we run through every semester. There's Ask Dr. Robin twice a month, which is my absolute favorite. I love answering just random questions that kids throw at me. And I think parents like it too, because when your kids ask questions, just like jot it down and send them to me and I'll answer it. So parents enjoy that aspect. You don't have to answer all the questions. There's over 80 lessons. They all have worksheets with them. If you like worksheets, we have the coloring pages, we have dissections, we have model building. My kids have very different learning styles. So I've tried to hit on every possible way that kids prefer to learn. And then we also have a book club. So that's actually something, if your listeners are interested, I have a freebie for the book club, which seems like, why would a science person have a freebie for a book club? But, we already have some free samples online. There's already videos they can watch for the lessons. But the book club is something that I feel like is a little bit special, because some of these books people may have already learned, but not from a doctor. And so we have a middle grade novel book club that's once a month. We read a different book. Kids can come to a live book club meeting at the end of the month, but they don't have to. But at the meeting is when I really teach about like all the science of the medical conditions in the book, because each book is chosen where the main character is a kid who has a medical condition, who has a disability. And so it really brings it into reality, right? It really makes it like, this is what it's like to live with these conditions. But they're chosen specifically by, there's a librarian, a children's librarian, a teacher, and myself who work together on this. where the kids are not passive recipients of a diagnosis, right? They're like active, interesting people who are doing cool stuff and also having medical diagnosis that's affecting how the plot line goes. So that's something that is something that's near and dear to my heart because I love reading. And but also I think is another way that it brings it into real life for the kids.
I know our homeschooling parents who like the holistic cross-curricular learning are just geeked right now. So for our final question, Doc Robin, I love to leave parents with a very practical step, one thing that they can do to get a kind of a quick win with this information. What would you recommend?
Next time you're with your kids and they ask a why question, don't answer it. Like instead start thinking like, well, and maybe answer with like, oh, well, I wonder why. I wonder, how could this be? And lead them to that answer. The first time it's really awkward and hard. I mean, it's maybe the second time, maybe the 10th time. And still sometimes, like I've been doing this for forever and I do it professionally and I still want to jump in and give them an answer. But the more we can step back and be like, oh, I wonder why. Well, and then make observations. And what do you notice about this? Feed them observations, little bits and pieces along the way, like, a trail of cookie crumbs to let them figure out a lot for themselves. It helps them think scientifically. But if you forget and you give them an answer, don't feel bad. I do it too. So
perfect. Thank you so much, Doc Robin. And we will be sure to link to all of your resources and your classes anywhere we share this interview. It's been wonderful chatting with you. Healthy Parenting Handbook listeners, I will see you again next week.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I had a great time.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Healthy Parenting Handbook podcast. I hope your brain feels fed and your heart feels full and that you feel connected, knowing that there are other parents on this journey with you. We're just trying to raise healthy, independent adults. And the next time you think, man, there is no handbook for this job. Now there is the Healthy Parenting Handbook. Look up the podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. Please leave a review, my friends, as that helps other parents who need this information to find us. And of course, subscribe. That's a huge help. You can also look for our shorts as a reel on Instagram at Katie Kimball Kids Cook, or subscribe to the Healthy Parenting Handbook Shorts channel on YouTube. You'll get those bite-sized portions of healthy parenting advice.